Good day, everybody. This is Justin from the RC and Coffee YouTube channel and Facebook page. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing, share our content with your friends, invite your friends, comment so that we can get a better ideas of what you guys want us to talk about and we can share on common interest. So I have my co-presenter, Yoko the Pug. So Yoko the Pug typically goes outside whenever I do a video because as being a pug, she sleeps a lot and snores a lot. So I figured that if she's not going to go outside, well, she may as well contribute to this channel by assisting me in presenting this chassis. You like the SCX10, right? Yes, she does like it. So I'm not sure which part she'll cover yet, but we'll figure it out. Okay, so today, as part of this multi-part series about the best chassis for a scale construction build, we're going to start with this heavily modified SCX10 chassis. Heavily modified because typically once you get the SCX10 chassis, you notice a pretty big transmission right in the middle, right here when you have your scale interior exactly in the area that you need in order to put that scale interior in and put that body on. So as you can see, this transmission has been replaced by a transfer case. That transfer case seems to be, I'm not sure what you can see on the camera, I'll try to change the angle, there you go. It seems to be sitting high and, admittedly so, it could that T-case rather, could be lowered onto the bottom pen there, but there's no need. There's no need because as you can see, and probably with a ruler it'll be a bit easier, it actually sits lower, well, it sits lower than the rails by about 2 millimeters, give or take. Now, what I did so this chassis was modified in order to accommodate a hard body, a Jeep hard body rather. So what I did, I bought the forward mount transmission from Spare Time Hobbies. Of course, the links will be in the description below. And it sits, for being at the front, it really is at the front, sitting before the front axle. So it's really, at the front. Now, so it's a huge advantage because now I have all the room in the world to be able to put the scale interior and, slap the body on top. The drawback with this setup is that the bolt of the slipper clutch protrudes slightly out of the rails there. So essentially, you really got to make sure that your entire construction does work and that your body's not going to be slightly shifted to the front in order to accommodate that what seems to be like half an inch of difference between where that bolt sits and the end of the rails are. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But overall, rather, it is a fantastic option. Now, I was looking at pushing it slightly backwards because there is a little hole there. So you'd think that you'd be able to push to mount the transmission slightly rearwards. You can do so because the motor, and that's a 35T, it's a 540 can, is already flush with the shock tower, so there's no way for you to do that. And on the other side, exactly the same issue. The transmission is already flush against the railing, so unfortunately you can't. But it's really good for what it is. Now this chassis retails for $999.99. It's the cheapest chassis here, stock, without obviously the options that I've put on the modifications that I've put on there when you buy it. It's also one that is it requires extensive modifications in order to slap on a hard body on this one. However, there's a ton of aftermarket of Axial, so it requires work, but the parts are there, the parts availability is there. People have done it for ages, so it's a really good option if you're willing to put in the work. So the other modifications that I've done, because the transmission is now sitting way at the front there, we need a much longer shaft there. So that has been replaced with a metal shaft here. This is just holding with double-sided tape simply to get the proper positioning. And I changed the shaft, the drive shaft at the rear for a metal one as well, although the length isn't as compromised or changed rather from the original position compared to this guy there. The shaft here has also been changed. Now, what's really good with this chassis is the wheelbase option. You have three. You have 11.4 inches, you got 12 inches, you got 12.4. So you have a delta, or a range rather, of 1 full inch of wheelbase, which is really good. What's not as good is the position of the gearbox. As we discussed, it is centered. I mean, the gearbox is not long. It's fairly short, but it is fairly high. So the fact that it's only a one gear makes it easy to move around, gives you the ability to, you know, put into this little tiny box there. So in this particular setup and in scale build, especially if you're going to be crawling, what you really want is a, you know, is a low gear ratio. It's good that it's a one gear, and it's good that it's relatively compact, so that it lends itself well to modifications of such nature there. What else do we have here? We've got 90 millimeter shocks. We've got axle that are 7.52 inches wide. That's a bit wide. As a matter of fact, those are the widest axles that I have on the table right now. The BRX01. I've got a bunch of GCM Racing chassis, and I have a Cross RC rig there, and the Trailfinder 2. These are the widest axles. I don't believe that you have kits to modify, shrink the width a little bit. But then again, it's not too crazy. It's fine if you have a rig that's slightly more off-road, you know, worthy. A Jeep body really lends itself to that because, again, it's an off-road worthy vehicle. This chassis, I think, would be great for this. If you're looking for something a lot more scale, like a Toyota body or something that requires you know, different proportions and thinner axles, well, that may not be the way to go. But again, those axles can be changed to accommodate. The chassis stiffness. The chassis stiffness for this rig is actually really bad. It's one of the worst that I've ever seen, and that has been a problem with the 6x6 Unimog that Axial came up with, because they basically extended that very same chassis, which was, to start with, already rather flimsy. The reason why it is because all the bracings are made out of plastic. There's not many of them, and the railings are the chassis rails are relatively thin, and they you know, they are it's basically a bunch of C railings. The good part, though, is because they're thin, you can drill holes, you can drill additional holes to accommodate for any modifications that you want. So that's actually a plus in the context of a skill build. But if, you know, taken like that, it's pretty crazy though. It's pretty crazy. You can add bracing there if you wanted to, fairly easy. So I don't really see this as a concern. It's just something to think about. It's important because if you're going to be putting a hard body on there, you probably want shocks that are going to be, you know, for relatively low viscosity or thin oil or silicone, whatever you put in there. Simply because the chassis flexing, you want shocks that are supple enough to work and accommodate the chassis flex. Otherwise, your rig will not be driving very realistically, and it'll sort of like snail along. Not quite sure how to describe that, but either way. The aftermarket support for this particular chassis, A1, A+, the best amongst all the rigs that we'll be talking about in this particular series. It's fantastic, really good. So no worries there. They've got parts and aftermarket parts and parts. The overall perceived quality, though, out of 5, I'd give it a 2.5. Anyway, there's a lot of plastic. There was a lot of plastic that I replaced with metal. There's still plastic there. Plastic is not all bad. It keeps the weight low. But in the context of rigidity and skill look, that may not be what you want. The skill look of the architecture, 1 out of 5. Again, that's a 2.5 because the transmission is sitting at the front, in the middle, the motor's in the middle as well. So there's quite a bit of things to be changed to kind of accommodate a hard body there. The skill look of the axles, so that is a 2 out of 5. I mean, they're plastic, they're thick, and they're wide, plus they're red. So of course you can change the paint, but I mean, for this, definitely not ideal. The skill look of the chassis, I'd give it a 4 because it's the railings are realistic. They're not full bars, like literally the vast majority, with one exception at this point, I think it's the Cross RC, of all the chassis that I have here, which are full rails. This is you know, it's a C rail, so it's more realistic in that sense. And ironically, it's the complete opposite of the axles in this particular rig. The skill look of the shocks, well, they are plastic, but they do have the additional reservoir here, so you know, I'll give them a 3 out of 5. The chassis customizability, this rig is a 5. You can really modify it. It's easy to modify. Well, here's the thing. You have to modify it, otherwise it's hard to work with. But it's easy to do so, and there are tons of options. So it really deserves a 5. The shocks adjustability, you can put a cantilever setup at the back. Extra Speed makes one. A bunch of other brands, manufacturers make one. It's super easy to do. Therefore you can benefit from that, having the full railing here on which you can put the hard body. So overall, given that the scoring that we currently have, again, I'm open to suggestions. I'm open to adding more criteria, and that may affect the overall score. But we are at 3.17 out of 5 in average with regards to the suitability of this particular chassis in the context of a scale build. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video.